Well, welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. We are so glad you're joining us today. I am your podcast co host, Lindsay Few, and Dr. Kim is in the studio with me today. So, most couples have experienced recurring arguments that never truly resolve, and that leaves you with now two problems. One, you've never solved the issue, and two, now one or both of you are hurt or angry. And you've probably got some baggage too. So, we're going to help you truly resolve the issues that need it today. And before we get into this topic, I want to let you know about the conflict workbook and cheat sheet that we have for you. We've created just one of our most popular resources, actually, is the cheat sheet because it gives you some really quick and easy, practical problem solving tips for when you're in conflict. And so we will have links to that in the show notes. And also, I want you to stick around to the end for a great freebie we have for you if you are wanting to build into your marriage. So, Dr. Kim, most couples have experienced recurring arguments without true resolution. Why does this happen?
I think there's a number of reasons, but I think we always should go back to communication, poor communication, not listening, avoiding topics, not being empathetic with your spouse, being critical, being defensive, all those things that come out of bad communication. And I think, I tell couples a lot of times, if you can learn to really communicate well, you will have a lot less conflict because you will understand each other and you will listen to each other. And when you do that well, a lot of times it just takes care of the conflict, keeps it from happening because you're on the same page with things. And I think then another thing, topics they're not on the same page with. And so that causes conflict. Maybe it's finances, maybe one's a spender, one's a saver, maybe they're both spenders. And so it's like, we're really in trouble raising kids. I think you've got to figure out how you get on the same page with raising kids. And so you argue about that. Like if you both came from homes and you thought your parents did pretty well, then you think, well, my parents is the right way. And the other spouse thinks my parents is the right way. And you got to figure out what is our way. And so, but those become topics that you just recur and you don't really resolve. And I think it goes back to communication is probably the main reason you don't resolve those things. But those are some that I think happen just pretty typically of things, the reason why couples get in trouble and don't resolve arguments because they're just not communicating well. They're on different pages with the topics, and it becomes a win-lose thing instead of the marriage winning. And you've got to get past that win-lose thing. That was one of our early issues was win-lose because of our personality types. And we had to realize this is not, because if one of us lost in an argument, then the marriage lost. And it took us a while to realize that because we were connected, totally unconnected. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate when you think that you've won the argument and then you're like, what actually did that gain?
Exactly. No, it's not like you're in debate class at school and you get a trophy.
No trophy for that. No.
You can't find your wife for 2 days.
Right.
She's in the house, but you're not going to find her.
That is not a win. No. And so I think that's where the baggage comes in, is because if you just constantly are having these issues, but you never resolve them, then it's like, well, we don't even want to bother to bring it up. Let's sidestep the issue as hard as we can because we have this fear that we're going to just get right back into it because you're in this pattern. And so it becomes an additional issue. You don't want to communicate about it because you're afraid that it's just going to blow up in your face again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so again, you avoid, which we've talked about over and over, that doesn't get it. It's still there. The problem is still there, and just avoiding it is not going to change it. It's not going to make it go away. It just doesn't.
Right. And it's interesting too, because we haven't mentioned yet that some people are more naturally conflict avoidant. Some are more conflict, just okay with conflict. And so that's one of the things we break down in our conflict workbook that we have, which is just an awesome resource you can get for a donation of any amount on the link in our show notes or at awesomemarriage.com, because it kind of helps depersonalize those different traits. It's so easy to make it right, wrong. Like, well, you always run from conflict because you're broken, or you always start a fight because you're broken. And no, it's not that. It's just, you need to be able to acknowledge there are some different styles here.
Absolutely. And to begin to work together on that again, instead of like making it a right or wrong thing.
Right, right. Yeah, we always want to go into that right wrong. But so if you are willing to share, are there any recurring fights you and Nancy have experienced?
I think we have had different ones over the years. I think coming together on money was one that we
Mhm.
had to really that we thought about a lot early on, what to spend, what not to spend, all those kind of things. And I think came as, coming into marriage, we both, our parents had helped us through college.
Mhm.
And so we get married and now we've got money. I mean, we're doing things together. We're both, well, I'm working, Nancy's finishing school, those kind of things. And so I think we just thought about money. It was
Mhm.
like, why'd you spend this, that? Or then we get a bill and we think, oh my gosh, all that kind of stuff. So we had a lot of fights on that. One of the
Mhm.
things that helped us that I've shared before, though, I think is when we'd fight, say we'd have some extra money and we'd fight on what we were going to spend it on. Or
Mhm.
one of us, sometimes me, would go ahead and just spend it. And
Mhm.
that never worked out really well either. So we
Yep.
began to make this priority list of things that we wanted for like our home. That was mainly
Mhm.
what it is. And so when we got extra money, whatever the first thing was on the list, that's what the money went to. And then the next thing would move on up. That helped us a lot
Mhm.
in stopping that recurring fight every time we had extra money, was to
Mhm.
have this priority list that we'd both agreed on. And there are things that, on some of the things on the list, definitely more things Nancy wanted more than I did. And some of the
Mhm.
things on the list I wanted more than she did. But it gave us, and it was fair. And so we'd just
Mhm.
keep going down the list. And I think too, a lot of ours was learning that we could not continue to um, want our way or to win even when it wasn't that important. We would
Mhm.
we would have a win lose thing over, are we going to eat dinner at the table or on TV trays? I
Yeah.
mean, it was crazy some of the things that we would fight on. Now, and those were usually things when things had not been going well and you just agitated with
Mm.
each other, and so anything
Mhm.
can be an issue. Why in the heck do you want to eat on the TV trays? We need to eat at the table. That's the way my
Mhm.
parents did it. Whatever those
Right,
kind of
right.
things. And anyway, those are things I think. Just the money. I think a lot of couples you've got to figure out money. I think sometimes it's really hard to do that. A lot of times you need some help, a financial advisor or counselor to help you kind of
Mhm.
get through some of those things, because you don't want that to continue to be your problem. You want to be
Mhm.
together on money. Money's always going to be something I think we have to deal with, but you can deal with
Mhm.
it together, or you can deal with it and fight about it. And so
Mhm.
learning to deal with it together, just like anything else, when you're dealing it together, it just doesn't have the negative effect that it does when you're dealing with it, just each one of you individually.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a tough one, and we know that a lot of people are struggling with that one too. That's really just a common pain point, and it definitely was tough for us too. It's funny when I think about recurring arguments, the ones that I feel like we've struggled with the most are just the dumbest things. Like really, like you're
Mm,
saying about sit at the table or the TV trays. It's just these little things you would not expect to fight about. Like one of ours was like how much clutter is okay on the countertop and what type of clutter is okay on the countertop. And of course, we have totally different perspectives on where that pile of mail needs to go, what to do. And it just was something that, like, it was right, wrong. We both thought our way is right, your way is wrong. And it just becomes an issue that is so avoidable, but it would just trip us up every time because it's like, how do you resolve this issue when it's this small? But it really does just keep becoming an argument.
yeah, yeah. It reminds me, I did not know that Nancy had this idea of how many things could be on the kitchen counters, a toaster or a coffee maker, or that there was
Yeah.
a limit. And so
Uh-huh.
I think we had a couple of things, three things on, and I bought a coffee bean grinder
Oh.
and just put it there on the counter, and it was like, no, that's too many. And I finally realized there's only so many things that can be on the counters. Just and so I didn't fight that. I thought, because I'd have the ice cream maker, I'd have the coffee maker,
Sure.
I'd just have every you know machine that I could think of to find that would be fun to have in a kitchen, all lined up on the counter. Well,
Yeah.
no, gotta have a lot of counter space. So in this house, we built area that's kind of my coffee bar, and I can put whatever I want on that because it's kind of to the side, and she doesn't have to look at it all the time. So I can put
Okay.
two coffee makers and a grinder and French press, all that stuff that I want to do. So like that. But yeah, I think that it's a great example. A lot of things are just and things you don't know. I
Hmm.
had no idea there was a limit on how many things we could have on the counters until I bought the one that took it over the limit.
Sure. You
You
wouldn't
know,
think to
and so
prepare for that. Yeah.
but yeah, I think a lot of times couples will come in counseling so many times and tell me about this horrible fight they have, and I'd say, "Well, what started?" And neither one of them can remember
Right.
because it probably was trivial. But once you've yelled at each other, and once
Yeah.
you've said some things that you shouldn't have said to each other, that becomes the problem. And
Hmm.
you know, they a lot of times can even remember what the trigger was that got them into
Hmm.
that. So yeah, I think a lot
Oh,
of times we fight over things that are just not that big a deal.
it's so true. And it's like, it's just perplexing because you're like, how did we do this again? We didn't mean to. But yeah. And, I'll help you out with this one too. Nancy is correct. There is certainly a limit to how many things belong on a counter.
I figured you'd say that.
I mean, it just seems obvious to me. No, it is funny though, because it's such a personal thing. It's like, there's no right or wrong there. It's just, what matters to you? What matters to your spouse? And how are you going to put those two things together?
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, and I think one thing that got me, we kind of like, there's areas that, I mean, like kitchen, like we both cook, but I just kind of see that as her domain.
Mm. Hmm.
And so, okay, I'll go with that on that. That's not a
Hmm.
fight. That's not a hill I want to die on or fight
Right. That's a
on or
great
those kind of
point.
things. So now we're resigned to, I have my office and I get to do anything. I thought I got to do anything I want
Yeah.
to knit, but what I do the other day was going to add something. She goes, no, I don't think that'll work in there. And so I can't remember what it was, but that, I think, and I've talked to guys about that. I've talked to couples that are remodeling or building a house, and just the guys realizing that women, there's something really special about a home to a woman. And so if you're
Mm.
remodeling or building or redecorating or things, don't die on that hill unless it's something that's just completely important because Nancy does a better job than I did. Our house wouldn't look at all like it if I decorated the whole house, at
Mm.
all. And so learning to value that she has great taste and
Hmm.
and I love everything she does, and it doesn't need to be a fight at
Hmm.
all.
Hmm. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that too, because actually that's next week's topic. So, little teaser for next week. Are you choosing your battles well? How to do that? Because,
Yeah,
gosh, if we could just all learn that, that would make things so much easier in
so
marriage.
much easier, so much easier.
So
The one
much.
time that I did let her, she had a decorator. This was when we were living in the house we lived in for 32 years. That talked her into painting our bedroom pink. And so I lived with it for about a month without saying anything. And finally I said, honey, I don't think I can do this. And she goes, I don't like it that well either. So that weekend we bought paint and I spent all weekend repainting that to color that we both liked. And so anyway,
That is funny.
and
Well,
this,
good thing you spoke up because she got the chance to speak up too.
yes, yeah. I don't know if she would ever brought it up that was bugging her too, but it was just a little too much for me.
That is so funny. Well, okay, so when we get in these dumb arguments, so what's the first step to starting to figure out what's under the surface? Because that's kind of the whole point here is these arguments that recur
Yeah.
over and over. There are some that are pretty obvious hot button issues, but sometimes something completely small becomes a hot button issue for some reason and you just can't figure out why. It's because there's something under the surface.
Yeah.
So, for example, when we got into an argument about the clutter on the counter, it's like, well, for one of us, it's like this blame thing of like, well, you're messy. So of course you like the clutter on the counter. Well, you're rigid and uptight. So of course you're going to pick on me about my clutter. And so it's these horrible blaming and labels that kind of come into it without even knowing. But how can you start getting under the surface? What are the steps to figuring out what's actually going on?
Well, I think you've got to take a step back about
Hmm.
from the argument, whether that's with a timeout or whatever. Because, when emotions are running high, it really is hard to see the bigger picture. You
Hmm.
just don't. You're focused on you're in that survival mode and I'm going to win this thing. So taking a break, I think helps. And then coming back when you're both calmer, I think that really helped us a lot. Because once we escalated in a fight, nothing good ever happened in that. So it took time for us to be able to begin to do that. But I think accepting that what we were doing wasn't working really made a big step in that. When
Hmm.
the same argument thing is okay, let's step back. Let's figure out what's going on here. Or is it what's in
Mhm.
front of us something else? And so I think then I think there are things that are deeper, and we found some of those. So
Mhm.
examine your feelings, emotions. What am I really upset about is a great question to ask, because it really
Mhm.
may have nothing to do about the clutter on the kitchen counter. Is there a need of mine that's not being met? Am I
Mhm.
feeling less than because of that? Or maybe what I'm afraid of in the situation. I
Mm.
mean, what is really motivating you? Sometimes with me, there'd be a different issue that I was dealing with, but really wasn't the present one. But
Mm.
that issue may not have anything to do with her, but it was driving my attitude, my words, my actions,
Mm.
and to see that, okay, there's something deeper here. I think the one thing I remember, there's a time before we really knew about love languages and figured out what ours was, with mine is words of affirmation. And so when I would not get that from Nancy, and she was pretty good most of the time, but there are times she just didn't, void. And so I'd get upset with her
Hmm.
about little things because I wouldn't get my love language met with that. And so once we figured that out and realized that was important, she's great about doing it. But that was something that I think probably there were some behaviors with me that were not good, causing arguments, causing fights. Didn't have really much to do with any of that. It really was that I had that need that really wasn't being met at that time. And
Mhm.
so, and so it comes out sideways. And so I think we have to be aware of those things. I think one thing that I think has helped, we used to call it a speaker listener or whatever, but I've heard the term looping a lot lately. And I like
Mhm.
that when you're talking about in a conversation, that if Nancy's speaking, then I loop back and tell her in my own words what I heard her say. And
Mhm.
so then uh, she's able to say, "You got it," or
Mhm.
I need to say it in a different way. And so I think that we came into marriage with a lot of assumptions about marriage with each other. And so when we didn't listen well to each other, we listened to our assumptions, the things that
Mm.
we came into marriage with. And so when
Mhm.
we were able to begin to really listen better to each other, I think that helped us work through that. I think another thing that you can do is just, are there some patterns there?
Mhm.
If does that resembles maybe sometimes even a conflict that you had in the past, previous relationship from childhood.
Mhm.
But if it's a kind of a pattern of a theme that kind of recurs, that may be something that has very little to do what's going on between you and your spouse, and more to
Mhm.
do about some things that you need to resolve from your past, so you don't
Mhm.
let those bleed over into your marriage. And I think then if you go through things and you're still struggling, I think just consider getting professional help. If you got a cycle you're in, you're fighting the same things, you just can't seem to get out of that cycle, go into a Christian counselor that can give you some insight, can help you, give you some tools, can help uncover, is there really
Mhm.
something behind this?
Mhm.
Sometimes, I've seen enough people over time that a couple can be arguing about something, and I can ask some questions just to explore with them. What happened in a previous relationship? Is
Mhm.
that something that you experienced in your home growing up? Did you feel neglected? And then when your wife or husband doesn't spend the time with you that you want, you feel neglected again. And so then
Mm.
it's coming out that way. So
Hmm.
I think those are some things that just taking a step to find out what's under the surface.
Mhm.
Um, but you got to take that time back to do it. Most of us stay in that same cycle. We fight, we get frustrated, we don't resolve anything, and then it
Mhm.
comes up again and again. And
Mhm.
so taking time to get back, figure out what's going on with you, the looping, really trying to listen and understand each other. Are there any patterns? And then if you get really stuck, get some help, get some professional
Mhm.
help.
Yeah, that's really good. Those are a lot of really great steps you can take. And I think, I mean, I like where you started with that because you started with just kind of de escalating or
Yeah,
taking a step back so that it will not escalate. Because once things get heated, you really can't resolve issues well. So,
right.
what are some tangible ways that you would advise a couple to pause to kind of de escalate in that moment?
Well, I do think you've got to take that step of just agree to take time out when you need to.
Mhm.
And that you just agree ahead of time. Whoever calls the timeout, the other person is going to honor that. And
Mhm.
then the person who calls it can also say, "I think we need to just cool down, pray, and let's come back together." Or
Mhm.
maybe I need to think through this. Let's talk about it in the morning, and then you got to be
Mhm.
faithful to do that. But really,
Yes.
just
Mhm.
to stop that escalation is going to be really important. And so I think the looping, of course, giving you a chance to express your feelings and thoughts with each other. Are there some emotional triggers there? What emotions really did you feel during the open? What did that remind you of something? Have you felt this way before? Things that just help you begin to think a little past what's going on right then. What are the needs that are not getting met? Maybe you're
Mhm.
not feeling respected. Maybe you're not feeling valued or secure or heard. And so these arguments are kind of surface level because you're fighting here, but
Mhm.
there's some deeper things around that are driving it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Patterns, are you talking about the same things over and over, fighting about the
Mhm.
same things? Are there things that are unresolved, or their needs not been met, things like that? I think being vulnerable is a big thing
Mhm.
that really can help in that situation. And I think that's hard for us to get vulnerable because
Mhm.
we're afraid that if I'm vulnerable, what will happen? If I'm really
Mhm.
telling what my feeling or emotion is, if I'm showing anger, but what if I'm really sad about something in our marriage? Or what if I'm really,
Mhm.
afraid that because my sisters both got divorced, maybe I'm afraid that we're going to get divorced too. And
Mhm.
so being vulnerable, we can talk about those things, what are our insecurities or fears,
Mhm.
and then when you do that, when you're both doing that, it really builds intimacy and it builds
Mhm.
trust. I think it helps. What's going on outside the relationship? What's going on in your work, maybe extended family. Are there other things that are causing some emotional problems that?
Mhm.
And then just again, I think empathy is such an
Mhm.
important thing of just taking the time to say what's going on with my spouse and what does that
Mhm.
look like from their perspective. That that I think makes a difference too. So I think
Yeah.
it's getting more honest, finding those things that cause a problem. And
Mhm.
then once you've got that, then you can begin to take action.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really good. And so you've mentioned some ways to get more honest, and a couple other thoughts that I have on that are two. We can link you to our feelings chart. We have a great one through Awesome Marriage because you talked about kind of getting more vulnerable with the
Yeah.
feelings, and it can be hard to do that. And so this feelings chart, I love this resource because it's just a free thing you can use to help you learn to kind of like separate out. Okay, I feel mad. Okay, we got to go a little deeper. I feel, and you gave the great example of feeling like there were some unmet needs that you had. There could be a lot of things, or the example of the fear of possibly getting divorced. These types of things are really kind of triggers for a lot of us. And when we don't have the ability to get vulnerable, it's just going to kind of cloud the way that we argue. So we've got the feelings chart, and then you talked about being more vulnerable with the spouse. I think another important thing that you've taught us, Dr. Kim, is using I statements in those
Hmm.
situations to share with your spouse what you're feeling instead of blaming them for what's going on.
Absolutely. Because we have a tendency to do that. And when
Mhm.
if I'm using I statement in the right way, you're taking ownership. You're
Mhm.
saying you're taking responsibility, which I think is a lot of problem in our culture, and I think it bleeds over into
Mhm.
marriages of just not
Mhm.
taking responsibility. And if I'm not taking responsibility in the marriage, Nancy sees me not. She eventually isn't going to take responsibility either. It's like I'm
Yeah.
not going to throw myself on that fire. He's
Mm.
not willing to get there, and so I think again the things that are healthy you've got to both do and be willing to do. And
Mhm.
the things we're talking about, fighting the right way and stop fighting the wrong way, makes a huge difference in a marriage. I
Yes.
tell couples one of the best gifts they can give themselves, we do premarital counseling, is to learn to resolve conflict in a healthy way,
Mhm.
where it's a win for your marriage. It'll change your marriage.
Mhm.
And so I think most of us did never see it done well. We didn't know how to
Mhm.
do it, but you can learn it. And you can, no matter where your marriage is today, you can learn it. You can take step one and you can say, and maybe step one is just, we're in these patterns and we fight and that escalates. And what's going on here? We need to address this. And maybe if
Mhm.
it's there, maybe your first step is to go to a counselor that can kind of help you
Mhm.
sort out some things because over time, all that stuff gets mixed up and you may need somebody to help you sort it out.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned saying that to premarital couples, but if you're many years into marriage, it's still an incredible gift to give your
Oh,
marriage to
yes,
learn how to resolve conflict.
it is. And it's made such a difference in our marriage. And,
Mhm.
sometimes we'll get to a little bit of escalation Not like we used to. We're not throwing things. We never really did throw things, well, except Nancy did once. But anyway, she deserved. I deserved it. Now she had one of those. I shouldn't even tell this, but anyway, those shoes back in the 70s. They're called clogs, and they were big,
Oh
huge
yeah.
things. And so
Yeah.
she's so mad. She was taking off her shoes when we were fighting, and she just heaved one, and the stupid thing made a dent in the wall.
Oh yeah.
And so I told
The wooden ones.
people. Yeah, I said I left that where not for her, but for me to remember. Don't ever let it go that far again.
De-escalate.
But, yeah, that's at 20 years old. So that's
right.
A long time ago.
Okay, so I want to push a little deeper on one thing you said, because you talked about using I statements, and you said if you're using I statements correctly. So what is an example of using an I statement correctly?
When you're taking responsibility. I'm feeling insecure at the moment. I'm not sure if it's just something within me, or maybe it's where we are in our relationship right now. That, I think, you're not blaming your spouse. You're inviting your spouse in, and you're saying, then your spouse can say, well, what am I doing something that makes you feel insecure? I mean, you get the things. If you're saying, I'm feeling insecure because you're such a jerk. Well, that I statement is not helping things at all. It's not taking responsibility. So, and I've seen people kind of abuse that with I statements, because, well, I use an I statement. Yeah, but then you just slam the person.
Right.
And so you want to say, no, it's got to be where you're taking responsibility. This is how I feel, and I don't want to feel this way. And can we talk about this and try to work this out together? That's using it in a healthy way. And I think an I statement can give information. If you're in a conversation with your spouse, and your spouse says you're telling me you're insecure, and I don't understand that. Well, then you say, well, I feel insecure when you do this, when you say you're going to be home at 6 and you're not home until 8, and when that happens often, then I feel insecure. And so it's also an informational thing too. So they're great to use because it lets you take personal responsibility. Just be careful that you're not using it as kind of an excuse to say something that's really not helpful at that time.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I have heard people say, yeah, we tried I statements, they didn't help. And if you say, I feel insecure because you're a jerk, no, that's not going to help. That gives no hope. It's just actually a sneaky attack. And so I appreciate you fleshing that out, because I think, just because you started the sentence with I does not make it the correct and the helpful use of that tool. But this tool can be really helpful if you're taking ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that leads us right to blaming. I mean, because we've talked about this a lot, but when we're blaming our spouse, or we're labeling them with like, you're a jerk, you're so lazy, you're always late, all these different things, what does that do in the context of a recurring argument?
Yeah, it tanks it. Basically, it's just not going anywhere. It escalates the conflict usually, stops if you are really trying to listen to each other, that stops, because if I start blaming Nancy, well, she's not going to continue to be open and transparent, and she's going to retreat. It stops problem solving. You're just not. If you are blaming, then it's like, okay, we're not going to solve the problem that works for us. They want to solve it their way, not the one that helps. It can trigger defensiveness very quickly. You blame. I think that's our natural reaction for most of us, and it just disconnects us. So blaming is so unhealthy. I see couples do that a lot. I've had a couple last year I worked with on their marriage, and it was anytime one of them would say something about, say, you don't ever help with the kids. Well, the other one will say, well, you don't either. And because I did, bring up an example, and, it just things like that just cause more problems, just create more distance between the two of you.
Well, so some really helpful ones. Are there any other habits that are going to keep couples just stuck in this cycle?
Yeah, let's go kind of through. I think not being willing to listen. I think when you're so preoccupied with your position, making that position clear to your spouse while they're talking, you're thinking about what you're going to say, so they never feel heard, because as soon as they finish, you go off with your agenda, totally discounting what they say. So unwillingness to listen is huge. And I think that's something a lot of us have to deal with. I think we have to
Mhm.
really realize what it takes to listen, because we know we can listen 5 times faster than someone can speak. So
Mhm.
you've got to really, that's why when we're talking about something important, we always get face to face. I get distracted easy. And so
Mhm.
if I'm looking in Nancy's eyes, I can listen to what she's going to say. If I'm not, I
Mhm.
may not. And I think the deal of needing to win, I mean, that's something that will keep you stuck in the cycle for sure.
Mhm.
And then another one I don't think we've talked about was just an unwillingness to apologize.
Mm.
That to be able to say, "Hey, I really am sorry." And I think that's
Mhm.
an important thing to do. Is that, and
Mhm.
not the "I'm sorry" like you would say to your little brother when you mother made you to, say
Right.
I'm sorry, but really just say I know that did not help our marriage. I know that was something that hurt you or made you feel a certain way, and I'm really sorry about that. And I'm going to work on it. I think the apologize
Mhm.
is not just I'm sorry. It's there's repentance in it too. I'm going to change. I'm going to work
Mhm.
on that. I don't want that to continue to be a part of our marriage.
Mhm.
So I think that is a huge thing. And when it's not there, I think there's just a void there that's just kind of
Mhm.
left there. I think another thing we haven't really talked about is mind reading,
Mm.
expecting each other to know what they want or what they need. And I think used to see it a lot more in counseling than I do now. And maybe it
Hmm.
was something in the culture at that time where people just, well, if you really love me, you'll know what I'm thinking, what I need, what I want. And it's just not
Mhm.
true. We've
Mhm.
talked about differences all the time. I think, too, the other thing that is, I see this in counseling a lot is just bringing up the past.
Mhm.
In other words, if you got to resolve issues, and when you resolve them, you got to leave them in the past. You don't bring them
Mhm.
into the current conflict. And I think sometimes people do that because if you've been
Mhm.
married long enough, you've got an arsenal of things that you could throw at your spouse. Both
Yeah.
of you could.
Yeah.
But that's not what marriage is about. It's taking those things and forgiving and releasing those things so they don't
Mhm.
continue to be a part of your marriage. And then the other thing that keeps stuck is, and we talked a little bit about this, is passive aggressive behavior. In other
Mhm.
words, that I'm not dealing with it right in front. Now, I'm not being with it honestly and openly with you. It's the way I may treat you, or things I may
Mm.
say that don't have anything to do with the issue, but I'm getting you.
Mhm.
I'm getting even with you because of
Mm.
what you did. And so all of those things, I think, keep us stuck in that cycle.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting too. And I feel like, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but I do feel like if this thing we've already talked about taking ownership and just communicating in really a non-conflict type of way. I mean, that's what the I statements are. Taking responsibility in a non-confrontational way could really diffuse a lot of those. If you think about the passive aggression, it's like I need to communicate something, but I'm not willing to say it out loud. So I'm gonna, you know,
Yes.
hint around or stomp around or whatever, make you guess, make you it's just not fair. And then all these other things, the mind reading, every single one of them, at some level, there's a failure to communicate. And so
Yeah.
there's such an easy process. And granted, it does feel odd at first when you're trying these on. You're trying these new ways to communicate and trying to take responsibility. And it feels odd. It does. And even with the looping, kind of sharing back, here's what I'm hearing you say. Am I hearing you correctly? These things feel kind of scripted or kind of odd, but the reality is you need a change. If you're stuck in these recurring
Right.
arguments, you're a lot better off doing something that feels a little bit goofy than staying stuck where you are.
Yeah, and I do think they're awkward at first. I can remember we
Mhm.
started doing the looping stuff, and now
Mhm.
as I think about it, I think we just do it. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
when we're doing it, it just happens. I don't think, oh, we need to loop this. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
okay, I want to make sure I heard what you said. This is
Yeah.
what I think you said,
Yes.
because this is what you want me to do. Okay, this is what I heard you say, and if, I want to honor what you want me to do, or what
Mhm.
you would like me to work on, or whatever. And so it's that clarification that's so important.
Yeah. Yeah, I know for us when we started doing the looping, it was like this feels stupid. And we both thought it felt
Yes.
stupid. But
Yeah.
the kind of hidden silver lining on that was it broke the tension. So we were doing this because we were in an argument and we were trying to not be. And so what would happen is we would kind of break out this little script of, I am hearing you say this. Am I right? And it was like, it kind of broke the tension because it was a little silly. And it also was kind
Yeah.
of a reminder that we're both trying to adopt a new pattern to get something else. So even if it does feel a little foreign or funny, like that can be a help in itself just to shake things up because you're breaking out of the pattern.
That's so good. Absolutely. And that's what you want to do. And I think just because I know it works,
Mhm.
just be willing to get past the uncomfortable or to be
Yeah.
uncomfortable for a little while. Because once you see it, my husband or my wife really heard what I said.
Mhm.
That in itself is a huge step
Mhm.
and gets you to a place that you probably haven't been maybe in a long
Mhm.
time with each other. And so, yeah, and then that should encourage you to continue to do that because you want to understand each other. You can't read each other's minds like we talked
Mhm.
about. And you've got to learn to, I mean, so much of communication is listening. I can say
Mhm.
things the best way that they could ever be said in my mind.
Mhm.
And if Nancy's not listening, it doesn't go anywhere. And it's not
Yeah.
going to help us move forward. Same way with her if she's saying something and I do the same thing. So listening is such an important thing, and I think it's something we all have to work on just because the culture we live in. It is
Mhm.
hard for us to listen well, and
Mhm.
it's so important. And just practicing it, I think. Like sometimes if one of us on our phones and the other says something and didn't even hear what they
Yeah.
said because I'm preoccupied with something else. And so learning to say, hey, let's talk about this. Can you put your phone down? And,
Mhm.
and respecting each other in that. So just breaking some patterns.
Mhm.
Phones have been such a escape for us. And we just can get so caught up so quickly. And so just being willing to give each other that permission to say, hey, let's talk. Let's put
Yeah.
our phones down, things like that.
Mhm.
So we
Yeah,
can
that's
listen.
so good. And I think too, I mean, you're right on the money about listening and not being distracted. Another thing I've learned from looping is how much time saying a message does not guarantee that it was received in the way you intended. Because there are times we've used this tool and it's like, here's what I'm hearing you say. What? That's what you heard? That's not at all what I was trying to tell you. It's like, no wonder we're arguing because we were not doing a good job sending that message and
Yes.
something didn't land. And it's like, okay, we got to do a better job of clarifying. And so it really helps kind of reveal that.
Absolutely. Something happened to us. I can't remember exactly. It was just last week. And I think it was me. I was thinking about something totally different. And Nancy came in with something and it was like, it just didn't make sense at all. But we had
Yeah.
talked about something and then I started thinking about something. And then she referenced back to the thing we thought about before. And it was just like, I have no idea what she's talking about, you know? And
Yeah.
because and she's thinking, "What is wrong with you?" And then
Yeah.
I'll say something related to what I'm thinking about, and she goes, "That's not what we're talking about at all."
Yeah.
So we all have to be conscious and work on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is just an easy way to make sure you're actually on the same page. And that helps. That helps a lot.
It does.
Yeah. Well, so Dr. Kim, this has been a really, really power packed conversation with tons of helpful tips for our listeners today. Do you have any final piece of advice to leave the listeners with?
Well, most of us fight wrong at some time or other in our marriage, and
Hmm.
so you're probably somewhere in that right now. You're probably really fighting wrong a lot of times, sometimes, and you want to work on it. So I just encourage you to take some of the steps that we've talked about and begin to incorporate those into your relationship and just begin to learn to communicate better, to learn to figure out what the real issues are
Hmm.
and all of that, knowing that those are things that you work on, that you're going to reap results out of it. Sometimes we
Hmm.
work on things and we don't see the results. I think in marriage, when you're working on that, you're going to see results and it's going to encourage you and it's going to make your marriage better. And so don't put it off. I think it's
Hmm.
so easy to say, yeah, well, oh yeah, it's almost the new year. We'll start that
Hmm.
in the new year. Let's start it today. Just sit
Hmm.
down and say, hey, we've been fighting way too much. Let's figure this out. Let's take some steps. Let's get this solved and resolved in our marriage. And let's start
Hmm.
today.
Hmm. Yeah, you will not regret it. If people like Dr. Kim and Nancy and me and Brian can do it, anybody can do it because
Yes.
we're all pretty stubborn folks. I'll be honest about that.
Yes.
Yes, yes. So I hope that you can take something you heard today and put it into action. If you want help to make that practical, grab that conflict cheat sheet that I mentioned at the top of the episode. We have that in the conflict workbook, both available for you at awesomemarriage.com/resources. These are things that will just break it down into small steps for you so that you can troubleshoot and understand your fighting styles. You can take the cheat sheet and just troubleshoot right in the moment and just grab some really helpful practical tips. And then we also have an awesome freebie for you, which is Dr. Kim's Marriage Multiplier email. I told you I'd give you a free resource, and this is one of the best things we have because it's just a quick, simple weekly email every single Wednesday with 4 things from Dr. Kim, marriage questions, marriage challenges, just to keep you being intentional, giving you practical steps to take to build up your marriage. So I hope you will sign up for that. It's at awesomemarriage.com, or of course it's in today's show notes. So if there's anything you need from us, never hesitate to reach out. You can email us at info@awesomemarriage.com. Find us on Instagram. We love to hear from you. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.